speaking about how inadvertently you used the name Gustav and his wife's name were accurate. When I interviewed you when the book came out, didn't you tell me a story that after the book was published, was it a conversation with your mother where there was something in
Good memory. Yeah, oh my gosh, this was years ago. Can you tell me that? Yeah, it was, when I was researching this book, and I would ask questions from anyone I knew that was living at that time. The worst people to ask questions of were my parents. They were horrible. So when I would ask my mother, I would ask my father, I would get, no, I don't know anything. How can you remember this? We don't know. Don't ask us. Ask your dad, ask your mom. And so I didn't get anything. And then, so I wrote the book based on other people, based on memory, based on research. And when the book was published, I remember I was in Washington, D.C., and it was my first reading, and my parents had flown in from Ethiopia to be there, and my mother had just read the book. And it was about an hour or so before I was going to go to the reading, and she said, oh, you know, I read your book, and now I can answer some questions. And she said, how did you know about Shefarao? And I said, what Shefarao? And she said, Shefarao, our leader, the Kabbalah leader that was in our neighbor, the leader from our neighborhood, how did you know him? I said, I don't know him. And it turned out that in my book, I had named the leader of the family's neighborhood, which was the same name. And I still, to this day, don't remember. But she said, no, you described him exactly the way he was. But there were certain moments like that that came up. Hailu in the book, there's a silver-handled pistol that comes up in the book. It's an ivory and silver. And my brother called me and he said, how did you know that our grandfather had that gun? I said, I didn't know. But it's weird the way memory works, and you don't know what you suppress and what ends up creeping out, you know, through the pages. So, Maureen, that's a great memory. That was nice.
She has great memory.
Yeah.
So maybe we should open it up to if anybody has any questions.
Well, I'll ask you a question, Sheila. Because I'm sorry, Maaza, I haven't read your novel, but I just read Foxes and I absolutely loved it. And it seems to me that there are recurring themes of yours of imbalance and abuses of power and monsters making monsters of people and switching back and forth. But it seems to me that you have done something different in this novel, that you're always writing psychologically, but there's a great deal about the split in Dawat and a splitting of personality that seems to be different to me. And I wonder if you think in this novel that you're tackling something unusual for you.
I don't know. Certainly there is a theme of identity, you're quite right. And he does have these moments where he feels distanced from himself. And that actually did come from my own life, being in Paris and being in this French family. And they were not particularly interested in me at all in any way. And I was just 17, had just left boarding school. And I was walking through the streets of Paris on my own. And just walking and trying diligently to visit all the art galleries and everything I was supposed to, you know, be doing. But I was alone, you know, for a long time. And I did start to have this kind of experience of have this voice that was describing what I was doing. Now she's walking down the street, now she's doing this, now she's that. So I was thinking of, and I don't know that it's the first time I've ever used that, but I felt it was appropriate in this case particularly, and we won't go into exactly why, but for what happens in the book, that's appropriate. The moments when David is so distanced from himself and can sort of see himself And the whole theme of identity here, and also how we become writers, and how we model ourselves on other writers, which he does, and literally step into their shoes in a way, which was what I was doing a little bit here too, playing around with Marguerite Duras. So the whole thing of identity, finding your own voice, finding your who you are, and what you have to say, and also because coming from Africa, I think that was so difficult, because one's distanced from the literature of the world, because things don't happen. You know, April is not the cruelest month for us, it's not. And things of that kind, where one's very distanced, and even Christmas, which is hot, and you know, anyway, in South Africa they had the English traditions of having Christmas pudding with the flame and all of that, and you couldn't see the flame because it was, you know, so sunny and so hot. It was all upside down and back to front. Yes. Yeah. So there wasn't a question of identity, and I don't know if you felt that coming from Ethiopia. What tradition do you belong to?
Yeah, you know, initially you try to figure it out. There's the thing about that voice that's running, that seems to be accompanying Dowie through his daily routines. It's really, you know, you do it. I've had that until finally the worlds converge in a way, but it's, you know, what you're describing sounds a lot like, this is what happens when people suffer through trauma. There's a way that you try to counsel yourself through days and months, and that's the way that I was reading that moment.
Yes. Absolutely. Other people have questions? Yes.
So I just read for the first time Libra by Pantalova. It's about Lee Harvey Oswald assassination.
Yeah. Fascinating.
And I really like the book a lot, particularly the first 3/4 of it. And the last part, which centers around the assassination, the event, and everything. I walked away and I thought, what was missing? Oh, well, he goes into everybody's thoughts except Jackie and Kennedy and all this stuff. And I thought, what if, you know, like, it really actually would have enhanced it if he would have dared to give some thoughts before it happened to her while it's happening.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So was it a kind of very bold act for you, to both of you, to go into the Emperor's point of view, which I thought was really well done, really, really well done.
Yeah.
Because he's just a regular person, he's kind of observing and kind of out of it and all that. Or to talk about somebody who, in the fictional sense, is iconic. Well, I read it. It was Marguerite Duras, right? You know? And when Dowie is thinking about her writing, he's going shuffling through her papers, he's thinking, who's going to be interested in this? What is she thinking? She's like, that's so over the hill. She doesn't know what she's talking about, and so on. Is it a bold dare to do what either of you did?
Good, you go.
The quick answer, yes. I felt it was, I don't know if it was, I was really nervous at first about doing it. And in fact, I think I wrote a few drafts of the book without the Emperor. Because I was, in my family, and for a lot of the people that I knew in Ethiopia, the Emperor he is this figure that he's not just a governmental leader, he is mythic. He represents the spirit of Ethiopia. He represents a lot about Africa in many ways. And so for me to try to approach him was really difficult as I was drafting the book. But at some point during my research, I came across one of the last photographs ever taken of him before he was killed and when he was under house arrest. And it was a grainy black and white image. He was sitting at a desk and he was leaning over this big wooden, it must have been his desk at one point, and he had both his elbows on the table and he's leaning his head into his hands. His feet, he's very short, and his feet could barely touch the ground. And there was just this it was this moment, this image of frailty, of complete helplessness, of vulnerability, and he was in utter despair, I felt, in that image. He must have known, I figured, that he was going to die very soon. He just didn't know when each day he woke up. And that was the window that I needed to get into this character so that I could start rendering him, as you said, just a man, 90 years old or almost 90, and not an emperor, because eventually he died as a man. And that's what but I needed that, or I wouldn't have been able to go through it.
Yes, and well, I think in my case with Marguerite Duras, I was just thinking of her as a sort of composite portrait of a well-known writer, and not necessarily of Marguerite Duras all the time. So I was thinking of, I was interested too in, obviously, the power that she's got and the power that he's got. And he's quite powerful too, because he's young and he's beautiful and he's very smart. And her power, she's rich and famous, but her powers are dwindling, let's say. So that was more, I didn't, the bits and pieces that I put in of Marguerite Duras, but I was really thinking of her as sort of a famous writer.
But your French editor.
Oh, the French editor. Yes. Mm.
In America, when they reject something, they say, I'm going to have to let this one go. The French editor, surely she caught on to the idea that maybe it was based on an iconic figure.
Oh yes, and she was upset about that. She said, but Marguerite Duras did not win the Prix Goncourt. This woman, she really was. I don't know why she. There were also some remarks about French editors in the book that maybe they didn't say she didn't like. And then there's the whole. Actually, it was Ed who told me of the story of this publishing house. This is, by the way, a lovely lady, and I'm so like her so much and grateful to her. But the publishing house, which is La Table Ronde. And Ed told me this, of course, Ed, who knows everything, that this publishing house, actually, they were big-time collaborators, right, during the war. Yeah. So maybe the fact that I brought up the detail about Marguerite Duras, which I think I read actually in your article in the New York Review of Books, that she had power because she gave the paper, right, to the publishing house.
Kind of like a censor. And that she would give allotments of paper to the publishers, and she used that as a bargaining chip to get herself published.
Oh, wow, yes, I didn't take it quite that far. I think I even saw her not publishing the things that the Nazis didn't want published. Yeah. And that may be also why my editor didn't.
Well, my French friends were so furious that I wrote that article.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I got raked over the coals by lots of French people. Nobody disputed the truth of it.
No.
They just didn't want
You're supposed to air it.
Yeah.
Actually, that's what's so that's the real punctuation point of the scene that Maaza was talking about. Its real power is in the fact that he tells a story of such deep suffering that they can only turn away, and so you intensify his one's sympathy for him is so complete then, and one is so appalled at their lack, So if you're French, maybe you don't want to know that. If you know the editor named Girard and Nicole.
Well, if there are more questions, I think we should all go back and have a glass of wine, and Sheila and Maaza will sign some books. So please join me in thanking these people.